Hello, and welcome to this special episode of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. Today, I interview 5 conducting students from the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland in Glasgow. I met them in November 2023 and decided it would be a good idea to interview them. This interview was initially released as a video for my Patreon subscribers, but I thought it was so interesting that I would convert it into a special episode for you, my loyal listeners. There'll be more about my Patreon page later and how you can subscribe and listen to more interviews like this. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Jacobus de Jager, Oliver Cope, Peggy Wu, Kentaro Machida and Riley Court-Wood. Hello everybody, it's great to see you all again. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
For the watchers and subscribers on Patreon, let me make some introductions and we'll go from left to right on the screen. So on the left is Jacobus de Jager, and then we have Oliver Cope, then we have Peggy Wu, then we have Kentaro Machida, and finally we have Riley Court-Wood. And they were all in the conducting class at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. As at least 2 of you know, I can't remember whether all of you have listened to my podcast, I always go back from the very beginning and ask how music came into your life. And seeing as we have one lady amongst us, let's go ladies first. Peggy, tell us how music came into your life, where you're from, your background, and how you ended up coming to Glasgow.
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally from Hong Kong, and music came into my life because my mom is a piano teacher, and my parents, they run a music school in Hong Kong. And so I grew up with a lot of music, and I started playing the piano when I was 3, and I also started violin when I was 5. And it's really one of those things where I didn't remember otherwise, not having music in the house. So then I think as I grew up, because music is such a big part of my identity, I decided I wanted to do it professionally. And so I started pursuing a career as a solo pianist. I moved to the UK to study at the RCM. And it's when I was at the RCM that I started dabbling in conducting by taking one of those elective courses, and discovered I really enjoyed it. But at that time, I still hadn't thought seriously about it. But then a friend of mine, when I was at RCM, one day randomly called me up and said, "Oh, there's an amateur orchestra in London that is in need of an emergency conductor. Are you up for taking the rehearsals and also doing the concert?" And I was like, "Well, okay, sure, but I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'll give it a shot." So I went there and waved my arms around, and I obviously was terrible then. But then somehow, I think the spark was ignited, and then the orchestra also enjoyed. So then I stayed on with them for a few years, and I was able to develop there. That was sort of my little playground. And then after a while, I did feel that I wanted to take it further, and I wanted to really get a formal technical education on how to conduct. So that's when I decided to come to Scotland to study.
Brilliant story. Like so many other people I've interviewed, sometimes it's a random event. The last episode I put out on A Mic on the Podium was Catherine Larson-Maguire. She'd done a little bit of conducting, but she went to a pub in Berlin, which was full of amateur musicians, and wrote her phone number down on a beer mat and ended up conducting for 10 years. It's sometimes how it happens, isn't it? It's just a random thing that can suddenly change your career path, life direction. And it's good to say yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to go from Hong Kong and go across or down, or where I don't know where we go. Jacobus, maybe it's down, being you. We go down to South Africa. Again, tell us how music came into your world and how you ended up making the very long trip from South Africa up to Glasgow.
Yes, of course. So, I'm from South Africa originally. I was born in Pretoria, and my grandmother, who's still alive, she was a concert pianist, 2 pianos mostly, and then also a great accompanist. So I grew up with her always playing in the background. The rest of my family all actually basically went into medicine. But yes, so took up piano, hated it at first. But I mean, then all the practicing came together, and in the end, I was quite indecisive of what I would like to do one day. I was actually interested in art or film. And then I decided to start with music at the Stellenbosch University. So I first went from Pretoria to Cape Town then. There I studied my bachelor's degree in piano and my master's degree in piano. There I actually, as a second instrument, I started conducting. And I met my previous teacher, Daniel Boyko, in Stellenbosch, who's actually an Israeli conductor that studied with Ilya Musin in St. Petersburg. So then it all just worked out that way that, I mean, I started with the Musin school. From there, I spent some time in St. Petersburg, studying with Alexander Polishuk there. And then since then, I've been applying, and I became interested in Scotland because of Martin Brabants and his association, of course, with Musin. And that's how I found this beautiful city of Glasgow. I'm still getting used to the weather, though. It's not great conditions for making music, but I'm trying.
Well, I do think it's a beautiful city, but yeah, I can imagine it's a bit of a shock coming from South Africa to Glasgow, temperature-wise, if nothing else. Yeah. And Ilya Musin, his name will appear later in some way. What's interesting is that I've been thinking about nothing but Musin since I was with you in December, and I've probably started incorporating some of it. But we will come back to Mr. Musin. But 2 pianists so far. Next, Ollie. Are you another pianist? How did music come into your life?
I do play piano. I'm trying to play more because apparently it's quite helpful with conducting, I've been told.
So they say, yeah.
But no, originally I was a harpist, and for the majority of the first part of my life, that was all I wanted to do. And sort of got into conducting by sort of making deals with amateur orchestras who would get me for free rather than paying a harpist, which can be quite expensive. The deal being that they let me do 15 minutes of a rehearsal and just, have a go. So I sort of got the bug from that. And then went to a place apparently other conductors have been to called Cambridge. And yeah, there I did loads of conducting. And as anyone will tell you, there's endless opportunities with all sorts of different kind of orchestras and opera there. And so that's where I sort of really got the bug, I suppose. And then COVID happened, didn't know what to do. So became a teacher for a couple of years, which was great. And a lot of sort of year 7 choir conducting, but had slightly, I suppose, bigger ambitions for conducting specifically, as much as I enjoyed the teaching, which is how I ended up here. And yeah, like Jacobus said, the weather was not an attraction, but Martin and all of the opportunities which are offered here certainly was an attraction. And it's been very nice that we've sort of had a class who are, on the whole, very supportive of each other. we all seem to get along. And so, yeah, so Peggy and I are just in the 2nd year of that course now.
The Cambridge route is one that's been well trodden on Mike on the Podium. The question I have to ask, because I don't think I've interviewed another conductor who started out as a harpist, was the harp the first thing you ever wanted to play? Or did you start, like so many harpists I know, on the piano and then graduate to harp?
No, I actually started on the violin just because that's sort of, normal.
I agree. Then, what's a normal route that is? I'm with you.
Yeah. And then a teacher came in with a harp, and it just, really, even as a sort of 8-year-old or however old I was, it really spoke to me. There was something about it I really liked. And, actually, harp playing has informed a lot about the way I think about music and conducting. The harp's a really harmonic instrument. If people don't know about the harp, it's got 7 pedals, 1 for each note of the scale. So you're often thinking about how your feet are proportioned. I mean, Kentaro is an organist, so it's kind of similar, but this idea of thinking about harmony through that specific part of your body. And also the kind of physical language of the harp. I mean, it's such a big instrument. There's not that many instruments where you're controlling it through everything you do, sort of sits between your knees, but then it's also, so it's your whole body. So I think a lot of that has, rubbed off. But no, I mean, sadly, I don't do a huge amount of playing now. I do a lot more piano just because, it turns out being more needed. But, I try to play a little bit every now and then just because I think it's an important part of who I am.
Absolutely, absolutely. Kentaro, we've just found out you organist, but did you start on the piano, and what other instruments did you start? And musical parents or not, or did it come out of the blue?
Yeah, so my mum's a pianist, and her mum was a piano teacher in Japan, where I was born, and I spent the first 5 years of my life. So I started on the piano when I was sort of, fourth, something like that. And I
maybe Kentaro.
And I started on the piano, and my mum's been my piano teacher ever since. I've never had another piano teacher really, which somehow worked out. I don't know how, but it's worked out. And then I started playing the organ when I was sort of 14, 15. I remember there was there was a guy sort of 3 years above me at school who was also Japanese, played the organ. And I remember going around to his house and seeing him play the organ and thought, that's really cool. I want to do that. Started the organ and then played the organ at school. So it was quite a sort of Church of England religious school. So there were quite a few opportunities to play the organ in services and stuff. And that led me to go sort of towards the organ scholar path at Oxford, which I did. I went to Merton and did the organ scholarship there, which was obviously a sort of huge sort of step towards a forward step in my career, which was great. But I first started conducting actually when I was, when I was sort of 17. I sort of did this masterclass actually with Peter Stock, and it was a sort of masterclass, local masterclass, and it was really for beginner conductors, people who really hadn't conducted before. And we did the part of the Carmen suite, the second Carmen suite. Obviously, I was terrible, but out of the sort of the beginner conductors, I sort of got this sort of prize. And I was like, I might actually be good at this, as opposed to piano, whereas I was all right, but I really wasn't great at all. And so I then developed that through uni. Had a great teacher called Roland Melia, who was also a museum pupil, and throughout my time at uni, had him as a teacher and conducted the Oxford University Sinfonietta amongst other groups as well, which was hugely educational. And then to Glasgow, really. I mean, as others have said, Martin, I know being a sort of great conductor, and by chance also being a Musin sort of school of technique, that really worked out well. And so that was the main attraction, and really love it here. It's an amazing city.
Cool. So we've got about everything covered. We've had a Cambridge and an Oxford. Is that right? We've had, obviously you've lived over here a long time, but you were born in Japan. We have Hong Kong, South Africa. I'm assuming UK. For Ollie, Riley. I know you did a fist pump when we mentioned, or somebody mentioned starting the violin. So therefore, a violinist? Question mark. But how did music come into your world?
Well, it sort of dropped out of nowhere. I think neither of my parents are musicians. My mom's very musical, much more so than she'd ever admit. Because when I first started violin, after years of begging my parents for lessons, whenever I would play something a little bit out of tune, she'd very sweetly say, "What doesn't sound quite right, darling." So actually, that's very good training for whenever you're slightly out of tune, having somebody. But after a long time of just being a total violin nerd and wearing out all my Oistrakh records, and I auditioned for Guildhall, and I went there for my undergrad. But all leading up to that time, when I went to Guildhall, I was quite heavily involved in East Sussex Youth Orchestra, which at that time was conducted by Colin Metters, who I know has been mentioned numerous times on your podcast, Mike.
Yes.
And I led that orchestra for about 4 years. And so I think in my second year we were on tour through Slovakia doing Dvorak 9. And I mentioned to him that I'd been sort of curious about conducting, and I'd loved working with him. He's a very inspiring person. And he said, well, why don't you have a go? And he let me conduct the last movement of Dvorak 9, which I kind of knew from playing. And afterwards, I hopped down. I said, oh, thanks for that, not thinking too much of it, but thinking it's a bit of fun. And he sort of took me to the side and looked at me quite seriously. And he said, well, you should think about getting serious about this. That wasn't too bad. And we started corresponding, and I went on a few of his master classes. And I did the elective at Guildhall. And the thing that struck me was there were so many people that I felt were so much more gifted than I was at their instrument, but would seem to get up on the podium and nothing would work. And they'd be so uncomfortable and they'd hate every minute. And I thought, well, if all these incredibly gifted instrumentalists find this so difficult, and I find it, hard, but, I could be comfortable, maybe there's something to this. And so I conducted the big shout out to London Lawyers Orchestra. gave me my first big break, and I conducted them in a concert and finished Guildhall. I had a year of teaching violin around London and just gigging. And then I auditioned for RNCM in Manchester, and I went to do my master's there. Then COVID hit.
Mm.
And that was about halfway through my second year, and I was just thinking, oh my God, I've got no idea what I'm going to do. I got an email back from the RCS because I had applied for their fellowship for that year. As a reserve, somebody dropped out, and then I was invited to audition. And on the same day, I got an email from an orchestra in Oman saying they were looking for a chief conductor. And it's funny, these little crossroads you have in life. And I just went for the Oman job because it was a job and it was in an exotic place, and I get some experience. So I went for that and declined the RCS thing. So I conducted the Muscat Philharmonic Orchestra in Oman for 2 years, which was a court orchestra. It must be the last one left in the world.
Wow.
And then I got incredible experience and amazing stories working in a totally different culture. And at the end of my 2 years there, I thought time to move on. And I applied for the RCS fellowship, of course, because of Martin, who I actually really got to know a little bit more by listening to your podcast. I think he's like episode 2, or isn't he, or something?
He's early on. Yeah, he's in the first 10 episodes. Yeah, something like that. Right.
And I came here and I auditioned and I got the gig. So that's me.
Oh, one question that I know that my subscribers will want to ask, because I have just mentioned, South Africa, Singapore, Japan, Canadian accent, Riley. But you were in the East Sussex Youth Orchestra, so it's stuck with you from somewhere. What is it? Parents?
Both my parents and my whole family are Canadian. My parents are moved over here in the early 90s. And I started off, when I first started speaking, actually, technically, I first sounded like Alan Bennett because I had a little audio cassette of him reading Winter the Willow. When I first started talking, I sounded like I was from Yorkshire. And then I sounded like the BBC. And then I think about 8 or 9, I just started talking like my parents, and now I'm stuck.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's brilliant. Well, I had to ask. I mean, checking on everybody's backgrounds. So, as I suspected, 5 very different routes to get to end up, all 5 of you, in Glasgow. For a bit of context for the subscribers on Patreon, I met these guys when I was up in Glasgow working with the RCS Symphony Orchestra. I think it was the last week of November, first week of December. And as I've had a relationship with RCS before, I've gone and conducted the orchestra before, twice before that, but also been up and done some classes with the conducting class. And so I knew that I was going to meet you. I knew that you would have done some pre-work. So, I mean, Riley was actually conducting the first piece in the concert anyway, the Erilyn Wallen piece, the name of which has completely escaped me. Remind me.
Mighty River.
Mighty River, of course. And then it was the Stravinsky Symphony in 3 movements, and then the Rachmaninoff Symphonic Dances. So you were doing some pre-rehearsals for me, but in every rehearsal I knew that you would be around. What I didn't know was I was going to meet 5 people who seemingly get on with each other very, very, very well, who are very supportive of each other. And we'll come to that later on when we talk about, you know, going out into the big wide world and sort of things you have to do extra from just, you know, being taught how to conduct and rehearsing and being watched and shadowed. So it was an absolute joy to be with you that week. And that's when I suggested doing this. I think what the subscribers will want to know is, what do you do in an average week? Is there such a thing as an average week? Your sort of curated, your conducting coordinator and lecturer, Michael Bawtry, basically runs the course. And then, as you mentioned, Martin Brabbins is the big boss. He's the, you know, he's the conducting daddy you all look to. But if one of you could tell me what an average week might look like, or the sort of things that you would do on a regular basis.
You've been here the longest.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's fair to say there isn't such a thing as an average week. You know, alongside kind of internal opportunities, often people are doing different things externally. So, you know, Riley is often assisting with the BBC, or there's some kind of engagement there. But, you know, sometimes people have competitions or auditions and stuff. So, you know, there's a lot which happens externally. So piano classes, I suppose, form the heart of that. And I think probably most conducting courses. So we would meet a couple of times a week. That's with Michael and also Ed Cohen, who are, fair to say, wizard pianists. And then, yeah, every week is different. I mean, so this week, I suppose, to paint a picture, we've just had 2 evenings with a guy called Ryan McAdams, who I don't think has been on your podcast, but I'm sure you could ask him.
I shall write down his name at the end of this filming.
And the Red Note Ensemble, which is I think Scotland's leading contemporary ensemble. On some student new works, and also he's been doing the Getty Piano Concerto with them, so talking about that. And then today, Martin got here last night, so we're doing 3 days with him, 1 evening with Glasgow Chamber Choir, 1 session with some woodwind players, and then several just piano sessions as well. And then at the same time, I'm assisting on an opera here at the moment, so I've been involved in that. There's rehearsals at the BBC with Ilan Volkov on Petrushka, which some of us have been going to see. I mean, I'm probably missing a couple of things as well. So, I mean, you know, that's just an example of a snapshot of 1 week. Maybe someone else wants to talk about sort of the bigger opportunities as well.
Well, we usually get 2, maybe sometimes 3 sessions with BBC Scottish each year, and some RSNO ones as well, right?
Yeah.
Which are I can't think of many other places that would give you that kind of podium time with a world-class orchestra.
And Scottish Opera as well.
We have quite a close relationship with Scottish Opera.
And Stuart Stratford. He's, you know, he comes in, you know, he'll come in a couple of days before we have a masterclass of Scottish Opera into a piano class. We'll have that, and then we'll do the sort of whole day session with Scottish Opera, which is obviously a great opportunity.
Well, it's lots of encounters with professionals, which is superb. You know, the fact that you get to conduct the BBC Scottish. I mean, I think the people at the RNCM do have the occasional session with the BBC Philharmonic in Salford.
Yeah.
And also assist them out, because I had an assistant very recently. I was there since Christmas. I'd been to the BBC Philharmonic and had an assistant, but also with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic because it's not too far away. But no, I mean, in Birmingham, they don't conduct the CBSO or go to the Royal Ballet, or, I mean, they don't even go to the rehearsals, which is, I find, frankly, bizarre. But I'll get off my political high horse. But incredibly varied, that what you have. I will linger on the piano classes because it's something I've sort of mentioned. Well, it's something I mentioned a lot on the podcast, and often used a well thumbed quote of Simon Rattle, which is, conducting two pianos is great if you want to learn how to conduct two pianos. How do you view the piano classes? I mean, I've been in piano classes at your wonderful institution, and I know how good those pianists are. I know how good Michael is and Ed is. But how do you view it? Is it something where you can work on just a technical aspect and tempi, or on upbeats, on on your Moosin specific things? How do you use it?
Well, I mean, I think when it comes to two pianos, it's really not actually about the sound that you'll get from an orchestra. It's mostly based on technique. And I mean, at this level, these type of repetitiers that we work with, they really react finely to what you're doing with your technique. So say an upbeat would really not be the same tempi as a downbeat. They would react that way, So it's very... I think pianos are great for getting that direct sound and to really work on the very fine detail of your technique. Sometimes it is very frustrating, but it's good. It's great and it's just great to work on any piece, actually, anytime. We can say this week with Martin, for instance, he said, well, bring what you want to bring. So I mean, I'm taking Brahms Symphony No. 4. Ollie is taking Brahms Tragic. I mean, Debussy Prelude. I'm not gonna pronounce it.
we always just say Lapre Midi. It's fine.
Yeah,
You can do that, Eric.
I love Midi.
Very good. I mean, what's interesting is, and we're going to come to Moosin, Martin, and all things beginning with M in a minute. What's interesting is that Moosin class, from the videos that I've watched of his class way back, that you can watch on YouTube, again, that he had very fine pianists who were following your every move. I've done piano classes elsewhere where it's just two people sat at a piano playing the music through vaguely around the same time the person's conducting. That's pointless. And I think that's almost what Simon is alluding to. I think if you have two very skilled pianists who are going to follow your every move, at least then technically with things like upbeats and downbeats and tempo changes and relationships, i.e. the technical stuff, I think if you've got two brilliant pianists who are following you, it's a very good way of cleaning things up. But as you said, frustrating. It's very difficult to conduct Brahms for, when you imagine the sound, imagine the beginning of the last movement, that the start of the Passacaglia, and it's, sustained wind and brass. Very difficult to get that with a piano. You have to imagine that. But at least if they're following you, I think that's really good. And again, with the assisting, you've got so many opportunities to go and watch. And in a city like, you've got, two big professional orchestras. I'm taking Scottish Opera out of it because that's maybe a longer run. But every week there's somebody different goes into BBC Scottish, maybe more than one a week, and the same with RSNO. And you have free rein to just go and watch what you like. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and the Scottish Chamber Orchestra as well. They're in
Of
Edinburgh.
course,
We
yes.
do, so Ryan Bancroft was here last term for a week doing Appalachian Spring with them. So he also came, did a session with us, and then we went and watched him do it. So that's a nice different kind of music making, which is good to see as well.
And also the pre-rehearsals that you did for me, conducting your own students. It's not easy, is it? not your own students, your own colleagues, your own peers. It's not easy.
So that's something else that we also do sometimes. I mean, it's difficult, but we also organize lab orchestras, and that's mostly up to us. getting the players, deciding on repertoire, and then also working with our peers. That it's difficult, but it's fun in the end.
I think it's a new type of exciting, really, with especially conservatoire students. You know, conservatoire students here they're so willing to do something that you know, different, or you know, and especially when it's a, I guess, slightly low pressure environment when we're conducting, you know, and for them to, you know, I guess, discover new repertoire, you know, and again, they're very responsive as well, which is great.
I mean, the good thing, and I've always said this at the end of any session all five of you conducted for a short period of time when I was there, because I wanted to give you some podium time. Whenever I've worked at the Conservatoire in Birmingham, I've done the same. I always finish the session by thanking the orchestra and pointing out to them that for you guys, that 10 or 15 minutes that you get on the podium is you're practicing your instrument. That you cannot do this without standing in front of 80 people playing instruments. You just cannot learn. And so to thank the orchestra and to point out to them, thank you for being their instrument for 25, 30 minutes or whatever it is, I think it's really important. And actually, I think it also, by doing so, what you're embedding in people's minds, should they want to go out and be professional musicians or orchestral players, is the fact that you guys have to learn this. You don't just walk in one day with a stick in your hand. You actually have to learn how to do it. And so you need to practice with somebody. I think that's very important that they know that.
Yeah.
We've mentioned him, Musin. The reason why I started thinking about it a lot was it might have been one of the videos that Ollie or Kentaro or Riley took of me conducting the end of the first movement of Rachmaninoff's symphonic dances, which I posted on social media. I happened to notice me doing an awful lot of this, of circles, whilst I was conducting, thinking, where's that come from, Mike? Because I don't remember ever conducting like that. I know that's one of the big Musin things, and hopefully one of you can elaborate on that a bit more. But how much does Martin? How much does Martin talk about his time with Ilya Musin, because he was there 2 or 3 years, and how much does he? Is that the basis of the technique that he teaches you, or is it something that he relies on occasionally? How much does Ilya Musin's whole thought process go into your studies?
So answer that. Ready?
Yeah, Riley, do you want-
Well, I think he mentions it a fair bit because I think it really informs his way of making music. I think it's quite integral to him. He's certainly not prescriptive or dogmatic. I wouldn't say that, but I think he's very encouraging to just have this in your toolbox.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to use it or you don't think it's appropriate, you don't need to, but you should have it. I was familiar with the technique a little bit because through Colin and the George Hurst School, there are actually some links. I mean, Colin went to spend quite a fair bit of time with Musin and a way back. And certainly, this figure of 8, and I did quite a few exercises with him that you can tell are derived from Musin. But I mean, I came from a place where I'd had no supervision at all for 2 years, and I'd just been doing my own thing in front of an orchestra that was developing and that I was training. So I feel like I'm in the process of really shedding a lot of stuff. And so for Martin to talk about a specific type of technique and conducting has been great for me.
Because it's worth pointing out. Sorry, but I'll come back to you in a minute. It's worth pointing out that when you were there in Muscat doing your 2 years, you're unsupervised, you're on your own, and unless you're very careful, bad habits will form very quickly, because you know that particular gesture gets a certain thing to happen with your orchestra, and especially, how do I put this? Especially with an orchestra that is maybe not top notch, that sometimes we rely on a gesture that frankly other people would look at, or especially teachers, and see it as bad. So, you know, I was much the same. I started conducting amateur orchestras and would rely on certain things. And that's when Sakura Oromo said to me, you need to go to Jorma Panler and pare all of this down and put it in a box, because everything was flying. It was like a speared squid. There were legs and tentacles going in all directions. But would you agree with that, Riley?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, towards the end of my first year, I started videoing myself because I had a feeling that things might be getting a little raggedy around the edges. And I got home after the first time I videoed myself. I thought, oh my God. So I kind of reined things in, and I'm glad I started doing a little bit of work before I decided to leave, because I think I probably wouldn't have got the fellowship if I hadn't had some sort of introspection, because I think I was doing some crazy stuff. Really.
The one thing I will add is, and sticking to what you said about Martin, and it's an arrow in your quiver, or it's another tool in your toolbox. None of you, no, better to say, all of you all conduct very different from each other from the times I sat and watched you all, which I think is great. You know, it would be very difficult for somebody to try and teach. I mean, you know, same fundamentals like the figure of eight stuff. I'm sure you've done the hitting the matchboxes thing as well. But it'd be very difficult for somebody to try and squeeze Riley's technique into, you know, Peggy's technique, or, you know, your different body sizes, body shapes, different people, personalities. I mean, how does he encourage that individuality, or is he just literally giving you tools each time? It's something for you that you can work on, different to everybody else.
I think. Sorry.
Yeah.
You go first.
Okay. I think, like, the way Martin works with us, sort of in the context of Musin's technique, like, the most wonderful thing about Musin's technique is that it's very applicable to different situations. Like, it's a very comprehensive technique where in any kind of genre of music, any kind of like timing differences that the ensemble might react to the technique, like the technique itself helps you accommodate for that. And what I've felt kind of like watching all of my colleagues and also like feeling it myself is that the way that we apply it is quite personal. So I think in some ways it kind of speaks like such volumes about the technique itself, like the school of thought itself, that it can be applied in such a variety of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, adding on to that, I think, you know, it's this idea of talking about the Musin technique. I've never felt that massively, that there's idea of, oh, this is the thing, and you do it like this. I think it's more about very grounding principles, which can manifest themselves very differently. The idea of picking up sound rather than hitting sound. Just for one example. And so, I mean, the interesting thing, we mentioned him earlier, Stuart Stratford, who we do a lot of work with as well, and other teachers we've had who've also come from Musin School, teach very differently and look very different. And sometimes there's a bit of a kind of translation exercise you have to do going home, thinking, why does that mean that? I mean, Gergiev was a Musin pupil, and you sort of look and you go, but that doesn't look anything like what we're thinking about. So I think it's very much about principles. And I think with Martin specifically, he's not just repeating things he might remember from how many years ago in Russia. You know, he's also relating it to, you know, 30 plus years of experience and what he's found has been effective. Generally speaking, those two are the same thing, but you know, it is his own take on things, and he's certainly not overly prescriptive of you should do this gesture here. I don't think he's ever said that.
No, I think he just has a very good eye for when you lose touch with sound, when you lose touch with the music.
Yeah, he also actually, I mean, he's a great teacher in the way that he gets you to also analyze your own movement. So it's not just feedback, it's you are constantly thinking about what you're doing next and whether it's working. So I mean, it's quite a lot to process after a class with him, you know, but it's amazing.
I think what's interesting about this is, you know, going back to the week I spent with you, we spent a lot of time having discussions like this, intermingled with laughter and, you know, and a lot of laughter. and a lot of stories. You know, I told you a lot of stories about things from my playing career, but also from my conducting career. And when it comes to being a teacher, which as you know I am as well, I think all of those things inform you. And you know, you take those experiences as a conductor, as a player. But I think the most important thing is I came away from meeting you guys and seeing that little snippet of video, and ever since then I've been experimenting. You know, I did some very late jump-in concerts with the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra and 4 different choruses. They're symphony chorus, 2 children's choruses, and a community chorus. And even in a Hark the Herald Angels Sing, I started just trying to, you know, hold and carry the sound. And I could actually get things to move better. I did some sessions recently with the BBC Philharmonic, as I mentioned. And again, there were moments I thought, no, I need to carry the sound better here. But there were other moments when I went very paneler, and you know, and you just think, no, actually, that's now not working. And so, as Jacobus has just said, you should always be thinking about what you're doing. And I think that seems to be the ethos. You know, how is this impacting what's happening with the music? Therefore, if I'm thinking like that, and you know, I am impacting it, but it's all of that very interesting sort of byplay, isn't it, between what you're thinking, what you're doing, and how the music is coming back to you. And I think that's the important thing about conducting. It's not just a dance routine.
Martin, actually, one of the last times he was here, he had to. I think Mark Elder got ill, and it was with BBC SSO, and they were doing Iberia, and I think two of the Shostakovich piano concertos, and they called him up on the day of the concert, and he, you know, he went in and he did his thing. It was a great concert, and he said that's technique.
Well, he'd never seen 2 of the pieces,
Yeah.
and you know, he said, you know, the only thing that got me through that was the technique.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a grounding. It's also thousands and thousands. Well, it's probably, you know, well into the thousands of concerts and recording sessions and experiences, and knowing that he. I would imagine, you know, if he looked at the score or he could look through it and think, yeah, I can conduct that. I mean, there are some people who can just. I watch Zachary Oromo sight conduct things. You think, how on earth are you doing this? You know, but again, a clarity of technique and a clarity of, you know, he just knew he could do that. He could do, you know, amazing upbeats and be very good at reading a score very quickly. So, I mean, it sounds to me like the perfect mixture of experiences, from the 2 pianos through to Martin, who's not totally dogmatic about everything being like him. Very happy for you to fit it into your way and your world and your bodies. You're all at different stages of your course. The big question for me, and did we really talk about it? We talked a bit about how much people get paid, and I was brutally honest about fees, and told you that, you know, don't get hung up on BBC fees, because they're not great, and you know, there are other parts of the world that are better than others. But really, you're at this point now when you're in, as I've said, you're lucky the 5 of you get on so well. You support each other. But you're applying for competitions, which, you know, we can talk about. You're looking at opportunities. You know, soon you'll be out there trying to earn a crust like the rest of us. What are your worries, fears, hopes? Do Michael and Martin ever talk to you about the professional development side of this? It's not just hands and arms, I'm assuming, and, you know, how to read a score. Going forwards, tell me about your thoughts about, you know, the next few years for all of you.
Do you want to go first?
I go first.
Yeah, we're second year as well.
Yeah, because fears. Well, of course, there's that looming fear of not having anything to do after graduation,
Yeah.
which I think Ollie and I both feel. So I think we're both in a bit of a position now, nearing the end of our course, where we're sort of, you know, trying to manage that anxiety slightly, trying to keep improving, for me personally, I don't know about you, but like, I'm just thinking about in the next 6 months how I can like squeeze the most out of the remaining time that I have here, so I'm like the most equipped I can be when I step out of the institution. And then I think for me, like specific to being a woman conductor, I think I do have a big fear about, of course, I know like nowadays, like there are so many opportunities for women, and like there's so much access for women. But the fear for me personally is sometimes being put in a position to do something because of that. And that I might not necessarily actually be ready to do it, to be qualified, like knowing that perhaps I've been put in that position because of being a woman, and perhaps I'm not actually qualified enough to do a good job. So I think like that's like personally a big fear of mine. And I mean, I've obviously like talked to Martin about this, and I think the advice that he's given me is just, you know, whatever I'm given, like whatever I have the privilege of doing, just basically try and do it to the best of my ability, even though perhaps I think the best of my ability isn't actually qualifying for the situation. But yeah, I think it is something that I'm thinking about. So
you bring up a very interesting point, because it's a hot topic about conductors of color, and also about female conductors and orchestras rightly wanting to be more diverse. I do, however, think, and I think you're right to think it, I think sometimes young female conductors and young conductors of color have been put in situations where they may be underqualified or not quite ready yet, and that's only been because of the orchestra wanting to be diverse. And you know, do we ever think about it from your point of view? You know, the fact that, you know, you're well aware of this situation, but it's no different from any of us. That any of the six of us, you know, I've been offered things, and not because I'm not ready. I just don't think I had the time to do it. And sometimes you have to learn the right time to say no. But in the main, I'm like you. I mean, I'm 53. I'm more than likely going to say yes to anything that comes my way. But I think you're right. I think sometimes people have been put in situations where they shouldn't be, and that's, you know, and it's good that you're thinking that. But I think Martin's right. You know, you go for it 100%. You've got the skills. You're well prepared enough. Do it to the best of your ability, regardless of, you know, what make or model you are. It doesn't really matter. You know, just do the best you can. I mean, go on, Ollie.
So I was just going to say, I think sort of something I learned a lot from Martin actually was that being anxious about this and about career is such a waste of time.
Yeah.
And when I remember when I arrived, I was saying to Martin, you know, Martin, I don't know what I'm going to do in 2 years. I'm really worried. How will I be able to eat? You know, afford rent. You know, and he went, it's ridiculous. It's in 2 years' time. And, you know, you can waste your time thinking about that rather than thinking about what you're doing now and trying to learn. And actually, if I reflect back on a year and a bit now, I'm in a completely different place. You know, I think in my development, maybe you guys will tell me I'm wrong, but in my development than when I started. And also, you know, I think it's fair to say for both of us, sort of little bits of pieces of work or opportunities which you couldn't have imagined getting then. And so actually, by just focusing on what you're doing, which is what Martin's always said, rather than worrying about the future, things happen naturally. And if they don't, I'll work in a bank or something.
I think that's the funny thing about opportunities, is that every time something good has come along in my life, it's been a total surprise.
Yes.
I've not seen it coming. You can't predict it.
And I don't think the anxiety, having spoken to people a little bit further along this sort of journey, I don't think the anxiety goes away.
No, it doesn't.
Like in any sort of profession, you're always looking to the next thing, and you can get obsessed with thinking, oh yeah, sure, I've done that gig, but I want to be a chief conductor, you know. And if you start thinking that way, you stop thinking about the things which matter, you know, music, etc.
Absolutely true. I mean, you know, you don't stop obsessing about, you know, the diary. Of course you don't. And the pressure only adds even more when you've got mortgages to pay and car loans to pay and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't get any easier. It just becomes different. And you know, and your career morphs into what it morphs into. You know, I started out conducting certain things with certain people, and then ended up conducting other repertoire with other people. And, you know, currently, you know, there are two institutions, organizations that I've been working with a lot, who seem to be sort of paring down what I'm doing, but I'm also working more with other people, you know. So your career morphs, and I think Martin's right. Don't stress about it too much, because if you do, it'll impact on the doing of the job when you're doing it. Everything becomes way too important then, and you stop thinking about just making music and doing the best job as a conductor if you or all the other peripheral things are bothering you. I have to ask, because you're all young, and also because the week I was there, you were all scrabbling around late at night, putting together video packages, filling out forms. What else were you doing? All sorts of writing statements. I mean, but competitions are a big thing. How do you just apply for all of them, or do you pick and choose? And given your age, and therefore the top age is normally 35. Again, are you using Martin's strategy of, yeah, fine, if it doesn't work, do it next time, there'll be another time, or how do you go about the stresses and strains of applying for competitions, knowing that of course just getting there could impact your career, not even winning it, just getting there and being spotted by somebody? How does that impact on what you do?
Should we all tell him about the mass rejection letter we all got?
So
The morning of rejection.
So the Malco you had applied for, you've all been rejected today. Oh dear. Well, I'm very, very, very sorry. I am very sorry.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to competitions, it's like you just keep on applying. Unfortunately, and this we have to say to all competitions, please, it's very expensive to be applying to all these competitions. And the worst almost, I mean, so we all got a beautiful rejection letter. But that rejection letter said that there were 390 applications. So since COVID, the numbers of young conductors have just been going up. And I mean, we're probably part of that group now, but it's booming, the numbers of people that want to do conducting. So, I mean, eventually it's up to chance. I kept on applying, and then I received a few rejections, and I was at a point where I thought, okay, no, maybe I shouldn't go on. And then that evening, it was last year, I think January or something, I got a acceptance for the Karajan competition. And then it all just, your mood lifts, everything goes up, just the chance to go and do that competition. But then you have to go and you have to almost over prepare. So I mean, competitions it's a real part of this process, but it's also not everything. And I mean, age is also a problem. I mean, one has to, I mean, I'm starting to think like, now I've received a rejection from Malco. I'm 27 now. Okay, when will I be able to apply again? Maybe. So you're always thinking of all these things. It is stressful, but at the moment we're just applying and applying. That's half of the time that we spend, but I'm always sending in 1 minute before the deadline.
I remember that.
Yeah. So maybe I cause the stress a bit for myself.
That's a crazy idea.
I will dig on one point there, because I find it fascinating, but because mainly my head was where it was at when COVID hit. I'm surprised that more and more people want to become conductors, because as a conductor, when COVID hit, it brutally pointed out to me how totally and utterly reliant we are on the people we conduct, on orchestras. I couldn't play, I couldn't get people to, watch a concert I was doing in my living room on the violin, because nobody would want to hear it. And, I gave up in 2014. The point is, as conductors, we need other people. And in the pandemic, it made you realize that actually this is a very difficult job when there's no orchestras to conduct. So to come out of COVID and for more people to go, hey, I want to conduct orchestras seems strange to me, but maybe that's because I was where I was at in COVID. You know, I ended up thinking, well, what on earth can I do? Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll interview lots of other conductors and start a podcast, which has turned into a Patreon page, which is why I'm speaking to you now. But at the time, I said to the CBSO, I rehearsed them the first thing back from COVID. I said to them, if any conductor is rude to an orchestra again after COVID, they don't deserve to be a conductor at all. Because it made you realise, my God, without an orchestra, we are nothing. We're literally nothing. Our job doesn't exist. So to hear that more people want to do it, well, maybe it means that conducting's a glamorous profession, and they're, I don't know. I'm going to dismount from my high horse quickly.
I think it's also in a few years it's going to be Bradley Cooper's fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Kate Blanchett.
Yeah. So
well,
maybe it's easier to first become an actor or a director.
Oh God.
Well, I will have to say that only one of those movies would have inspired me to become a conductor. Because I thought the Bradley Cooper movie was really, really, really good. I enjoyed that very much. The other one, awful, terrible waste of my life watching that film. A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. My thanks go to Jacobus, Ollie, Peggy, Kentaro and Riley for being such a joy to interview. Next time, in part 2, they get the chance to answer 10 questions like everyone else has, except that their 10 questions are slightly different. But until then, bye-bye.